Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In the interest of time, we're going to get started, even though people are obviously still going to be filtering in a little bit after lunch, but obviously we want to try and keep good time and pace for this session and the rest of the day. Many thanks to ABP for a fantastic lunch and you know, really great food, and also the ice sculptures were really great to see. I hope now that your lunch, though, you might be feeling a little bit tired, so we have an action-packed panel put together for you to keep you awake and keep you going for the rest of the day here. I think it's been a great couple of sessions so far. You know, we've spent some time talking about Brexit, we've talked about new technologies and what it's going to do to the supply chain. Last session, we focused in a little bit more on some aspects of inbound and in-plant logistics in terms of optimization projects, as you saw at Jaguar Land Rover, in terms of IT developments, in terms of smart ports, and other dimensions of Industry 4.0. In this session, we're going to turn our focus probably a little bit more to the outbound supply chain, as it were, given the specialization of all of our speakers here. We're talking about strengthening the UK supply chain and logistics, so looking at service, looking at infrastructure, capacity, industry collaboration and communication across the supply chain, which of course these are themes which are not just specific to outbound, but in this context I think we'll focus in on them more. I think it's worth kind of pointing out again, you all know it, and we've been talking about it, what a dynamic market, the UK is, and when you talk about outbound logistics. Okay, 3 million sales, we talk about a huge share of imports, also a huge share of exports. So roughly 80% of what we build, we ship out, 80% of what we buy, we ship in. So it's a lot of complexity that kind of goes into that. And in fact, the car makers that are on our panel today are both purely import brands here in the UK. And also Philippe from PwC talked about the way this market can shift. You look at the German market, and if you strip out years when there's been incentives, it's sort of stable, kind of incrementally moving, similar with some of the other European markets. The UK can really go and move a lot. We're just finished with September, which I don't have to tell all of you is a super busy month here, March and September being the registration month, so your volume might be double or treble sometimes of what you see elsewhere. So we have to manage this capacity in quite a specific way. You obviously can't just have a fleet sitting waiting to serve that, which would sit idle for the rest of the year. So there's a lot of complexity that goes into it. And again, of course, we've seen growth. We're still seeing growth. Brexit worries aside, or uncertainty aside, and that has naturally put pressure on parts of the supply chain and ports, out of the factories and the road and rail, and some of those issues I'm sure we're going to talk through a little bit throughout. Quick reminder, on your seats you have evaluation forms. Please take a little bit of time before the end of the next session, we're going to collect them at the end, to give us feedback on the conference, especially as this is our first one. We really want to know and hear what you think. We will use it to shape next year's conference, whether it's location, whether it's topics. You can vote for your favorite moderator. Be nice to Louis on that, actually. He's very sensitive about that. So do give us your feedback. There is a prize draw at the end. I believe it's an official Mercedes-Benz baseball cap from the racing team. At our other conferences around the world, we give this sort of biscuits, I think, from Claridge's, and we lie a little bit and we pretend that they're the Queen's biscuits and the Americans don't know any difference. But obviously we can't do that. We can't get away with that at this conference. So we've got a nice little prize draw for you there. Let me introduce our panel. We have 2 presentations from logistics providers, and then we have 2 OEMs in the panel who are going to join in on Q&A. First, we'll hear from Niels Lee, who's the head of global supply chain solutions at Wallenius Wilhelmsen Logistics, an important shipping and logistics provider. Pleased to have Howard Nash, the managing director of what is a new company here in the UK, at least, ARS Altman UK. Also joining us on the panel is Awais Ajmal, head of supply chain and business process for Kia Motors UK. And also pleased to have David Higgins, Director of Programming, Logistics and Distribution for PSA, also here in the UK. So as I mentioned, we'll have some presentations from Niels and Howard. Niels, let me hand it over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Niels Lie. I'm responsible for business development in our supply chain solutions team, Atlantic East. And for those who don't know very well, we are a shipping and logistics company. We operate a fleet of more than 60 vessels around the world, 40 VPC centers, 13 terminals, and also then through our solutions team, we are creating seamless journeys from factories to dealers using our own assets as well as third-party assets. And I thought I also should say, as a Norwegian, we are actually quite happy outside EU. But that's maybe because we don't have a car manufacturing industry, but we only have fish and oil. So the fish and oil business is going quite well, but we are very happy to be at this conference as well, and thanks for inviting us here. Overcoming the bottlenecks in the supply chain is probably not a quick fix, because if it was, then Louis and Automotive Logistics wouldn't have anything to host or any conferences to host. So the bottlenecks, or as long as the bottlenecks apply, we probably will have the conferences as well. I'm going to talk about two issues. One is forecasting, and the other one is optimizing your network. Forecasting seems to be an ongoing issue, and it has been a challenge as long as products has been moved or shipped around. And you would think that this could be better in today's environment with better technology. And as we heard in the previous session, we have so much data, but my thesis is that we still can't get the forecasting right. It's maybe even the opposite. We receive sales forecasts, we receive production forecasts, we receive transport and booking forecasts, and it still may be wrong. And I think the technology that allows for more flexibility on the production line to meet an even more or faster growing changing market. So what we see is that batches of cars may change from one market to the other very quickly or very soon as it goes on to the production line. And if the specification or the dealer change from dealer A to dealer B, that may not have a huge impact on the capacity of an ocean line. But then when you see 500 or 1,000 cars shifting from one market, shifting say from US to China, or not arriving at the terminal at all, that has a huge impact on capacity planning. And as long as we are told at an early stage, how can we possibly plan the capacity for one trade for the next month when the forecasts are swinging up and down so significantly? So how can the industry be better at this? That's what I'd like to discuss, or see if we can get some answers on or some discussion around. The other subject I'd like to touch upon is how do we ensure that the supply chain is as optimal and effective as possible? How often do you really do a reality check on the entire supply chain from factory to dealer? I think most OEMs are very good at optimizing, say, their factory to port, or even port to port, or from port to end destination. But how often do you take the holistic view to really look at the total supply chain from factory to dealer? We have over several years worked with many of our customers in a collaborative effort, identifying improvements through an advanced modeling tool. And we have identified some significant improvements, which I'm coming back to. And sometimes you don't even see some improvements, but that's okay. You get at least a verification that what you do today might be the most optimal network you already have. And I think the consequences of a suboptimal network that's leading to delays, increased inventory carrying cost, poor quality, and eventually unhappy end customers. So I'll first show you a little picture of forecasting. This, I have to say, this is a pretty bad example, but I just show you what actually, but it's a real example. and it is from a European OEM shipping in the Atlantic, and it's not based in UK, just to say that. We have set our internal benchmark targets for forecasting accuracy in order to plan for the vessel capacity, and that's what you see in the green boxes here. But what you see here is the actual forecast coming from the logistics department, what was actually finally shipped. So if you see the 6 months forecast for March, here showed a 29%, 6% higher forecast than what was actually loaded. And this changed, so in a 3 months forecast it was 6 below under, and eventually the 1 month forecast was 15% below what was actually shipped. When you go to the month of May, it was hugely different. The forecasts were actually very stable, 6 and 3 months and 1 month's forecast. The long-term forecasts were very stable, around 50% of what was actually shipped. So it means that we were, or could in worst case, if we didn't have good vessel planners, we could sail with 50% of space for that particular OEM with open space. And that, of course, have a huge impact for us as well as the OEM. And the forecast, that is our tool in order to make the vessel capacity. So you could just imagine if all the OEMs were as bad as this. So forecasting, with all the technology we have today, we still can't get it right. I think we need to put more effort into how can we resolve this, how can we get a forecast right. The incorrect forecasting makes the capacity planning extremely difficult. Suppliers are losing millions as a result of poor forecasting. And as well as the OEMs may end up with a lot of unhappy customers. Then the other thing I want to touch about is the optimization of the supply chain and the potential to save money. As I said, how often do you do a reality check? Flows and markets are changing, constraints may change, for instance, trucking capacity, rail capacity, port capacity, markets change. For sure the market is dynamic, it's not a static market, so therefore this should be reviewed time to time. So we have a model which we are running through with our customers, where we look at the entire supply chain from factory to dealer. We do a detailed analysis of the as-is, collecting all the information about the dealer locations, port of entry, all the as-is, and then we do a similar analysis and collection of the potential scenarios. Say we identify 2 to 3 scenarios, and then we collect similar set of information, which can be quite difficult if you don't have a good market knowledge. And then we go on, we model the respective scenarios, and then we eventually do an evaluation of the scenarios against each other, and discuss then an implementation strategy and talk to existing and identify new suppliers. So I'll show you a couple of examples on this. Here we have one example from US. This was an OEM shipping into US. You see, initially he was shipping a significant part of his entire US production through Savannah. After we did a total remodeling, this changed from 75 to 45%. So a significant change, and moving more volumes through Baltimore, closer to the market, which also then reduced the inland transportation cost. And the result of this total network optimization from factory to dealer resulted in a 5% overall reduction in cost, as well as lead times and CO2. Show you another case. This was OEM shipping into China on a 2-port strategy, Tianjin and Shanghai. Here we did a full evaluation of his network as well. And in a fast-growing market like China, we looked at, can you add another port? So here we added Guangzhou, and it was a change in distribution, so 27% of the volumes ended up in Guangzhou. The ocean cost remained the same, there was a difference in the port charges, and the inland transportation cost also reduced. So overall, there was a cost saving of about 9%, as well as the CO2 emission. We heard earlier today that the shipping companies are bad. So we also very focusing on the CO2. How can we actually reduce the CO2? So in this case, it was an emission reduction of 6.4%. On top of that, you will have inventory carrying cost, which was not part of this picture. So that was all. It's just two issues which are close to my mind on how we can overcome some of the bottlenecks and how we maybe can improve the overall supply chain. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Niels. I think it's obviously important issues, and certainly the forecasting side, you saw the variation there. In this era of big data and predictive analytics and all the sophisticated stuff that's supposed to be out there, it's not necessarily always showing up in some parts of the supply chain it might seem. So something we can maybe pick up more in the Q&A. I'd like to now pass it back over to Howard Nash, again from ARS Ultimate UK. Actually, sorry, Howard, I forgot one thing. We're going to do, sorry to do that, we have our live service, which I should have mentioned, and in this session, we're going to do some voting at the end. So actually, just a reminder about logging in. We'll pull this up again, but you might want to think about logging onto it during the session, make some comments, observe, because we're going to do our polling there. You had an email this morning at 8:04, I think, and if you just go to that email and click a link, you'll log in automatically. So sorry, Howard, we'll pass it back now.
Good afternoon. I appreciate this is the second presentation after lunch, so I'll keep it snappy and I'll get through it as quickly as I can. So, for those of you who don't know ARS Altman, we're a large German family-owned company. We move something like 3.5 million cars a year, and halfway through last year we made the big decision to launch in the UK. Some of the things that we discussed on the way up to that, I'll go through now. So we had some ideas of what we've talked about in bottlenecks terms. Storage and UK truck capacity, I think, are pretty much based on the current situation, so the upturn in volumes recently. The more longer term and the more concerning things for us personally are shortages of drivers, which I think is not certainly not just a UK problem. It's a European problem. I think we all appreciate that. It's one that has very, very few answers. So it's something that I think a lot of people have had to go at over the years, trying to improve it, trying to get people into the industry. But it remains a problem. Rail infrastructure. We're a multimodal company, so we are very interested in rail. Rail in the UK, for anyone who hasn't been involved in rail in the UK, our infrastructure is pretty much Victorian. Back then they weren't thinking about moving double-deck rail wagons through it, so it's very narrow and very short. The government have spent an awful lot of money over certainly the last 10 years. They've invested a huge amount in improving infrastructure, but unfortunately they've been making it container shape, not car carrier shape. So it remains an issue. And that's something that is a big long-term issue. So whatever we do in the UK, we have to make very bespoke, which makes it inefficient if you want to take it the other side of the tunnel. So some of the challenges in ensuring delivery of quality. This was one of the questions that was posed on the conference agenda. So we're asked more and more to supply more and more information, both to manufacturers, to customers, regarding certainly track and trace. What's out there? What can you see? What can you tell us? It's something that we've just bought 20 trucks, brand new trucks. They've got an awful lot of information in them. I'm sure this discussion will go on, and it's something that Niels touched on. You do have to wonder sometimes quite what is happening with this information and quite how it's being used. One of the bigger challenges over the years, I should tell you a little bit about my background. I've worked for a car manufacturer, I've worked for a 4PL, and now I work for a logistics provider. So I've seen the spectrum. And communication, certainly in terms of quality, is an incredibly important part of the game. So I think we all know that. I've put there listening to our customers. This is I will just touch on the Brexit point very briefly. This is a changing world. We know it's a changing world. We would all love to have a standardized, uniform business where we do exactly the same thing for exactly the same operations, but it's not like that. So we know that as a part of our developing business, we need to listen to our customers and understand their individual needs as well. And physical quality, it goes without saying, the last thing any of us want to do is to deliver a damaged car. It just builds in inefficiencies, costs, embarrassment, and everything else that we all strive to avoid. So what are the future requirements? Flexibility, again, just touching on the Brexit thing. Over the last 10 years, we've seen famine and feast in this industry. Honestly, I don't know how different I am from anybody else, but a year ago, if someone said to me Article 50 is going to be triggered, I wouldn't have the faintest idea what they were talking about. Now, Theresa May mentions it and the price takes a drop, just like that, the euro against the pound. So it's incredibly important, and we need to pay attention to what that means to our businesses as well as our customers' businesses. So it's something that will make a difference. We know it will make a difference. I think today we've heard no one really knows what that looks like, but it will become an issue. Forecasting, again, we've built in so much information now into our vehicles, into our businesses. Our trucks measure everything from driver behavior, fuel efficiency, fuel economy, routing, and all the rest of it. I'm sure with all this information, if you take it from the shipping line, from us, from ports, from the manufacturing, if we all took a step back and looked at it back further down the line, I'm sure we could get to a more useful way of managing that information. Competition, I guess that's us for now. Certainly in my memory or in my working life, I can't remember a new multimodal logistics provider coming to the UK. It's something we're very excited about. We think there's a big opportunity for it. We know it's not without its challenges. And on that front, I guess this is a very old discussion as well, a discussion point in terms of investments against commitment. It's something, especially if you're talking about rail wagons last for a long, long time, and we need to make sure that that level of investment is covered by a reasonable commitment. In terms of technology, again, we've built everything we can into making our activities and our operations visible. We're very open with what we do with that. We're not precious about it. We want to share that information. Again, for me, the most important thing is that we use it to automate our processes. We're already seeing some of the work that the machines just do used to be done by teams of people. So there are efficiencies within it. It's something, again, we invest quite heavily in. It's something that we want to promote. And as a follow-on from that, we hope and we want to use all that information that we're collecting in a way of positive efficiency. So we want to use that for our own forecasting, for our planning, and for our communications. So this is a little bit about what we do. As I said, we move about 3.5 million cars across Europe. We aim to recognise the needs of our customers. For me, that's absolutely paramount. The performance and communication, and we deliver an efficient and effective service. We are a very heavily asset-based company. We own all of our assets. We've got the biggest privately owned fleet of rail wagons, automotive rail wagons in Europe. So we've got 2,500 rail wagons. And we base our business on continually building that, our processes and our people. We want to employ the best people, and we train throughout the business to to whatever level we need to go to. And most importantly, we want to build long-term partnerships with our customers because our investments are very, very heavy. Like I said, rail, for instance, is an incredibly expensive commodity, and we want to wash that out over long-term relationships with our customers. Nearly there. Are you all still with me? Yeah, good. So our strategy is incredibly simple. We call this RCR, Rail Centre Road. We do long-distance movements by rail. We take vehicles off our trains into our centres where we carry out any technical activities if they need them, and we deliver them by road. That's what we do very successfully in Europe on a big scale, and that's what we want to replicate in the UK. So I hope I've given you a quick indication of why we've done what we've done and the reasons why we've moved to the UK. It's exciting for us, and it's something that we want to build on. So thanks for your attention. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Howard. Again, that sort of highlights some of the key specific issues that we see in the UK here in terms of infrastructure and capacity, and Howard, of course, sharing some interesting insight there into from his experience, how we can address some of those issues. Before we open it up for Q&A, I would like to bring our car-makers into the discussion now. As you said, we won't have formal presentations there, but perhaps I can start by asking Elias to give us a little bit of a sense of what the challenges you're facing now, maybe a little bit of feedback on what you've heard so far.
Everyone, thank you very much for the opportunity to come and speak to you guys. Apologies I haven't got a presentation. I think there has been a common theme throughout pretty much all of the presentations, certainly with Niels and Howard, in terms of data and information, and that's certainly a place where I would like to start in terms of the future requirements. I think one of the key things is there is a hell of a lot of information which swings around all various suppliers going to various systems. But I think there is a strong argument here to say that actually we should be going back to basics and trying to understand, right, what are we doing with this information? I think Howard touched on this earlier. I think there are different perspectives in terms of the data. You know, an OE or the factory wants or generates the data, and they disseminate that information out to either the OEM and to the logistics companies, so that they can get the cars out of their factories and invoiced. The OEM wants the information so that they can give the best possible target delivery date to their dealers and therefore their end customers. The logistics companies want that for being able to plan more efficient loads and to actually get the cars there on the promised date, because SLAs are dependent on that. And shipping lines, again, in terms of what Neil said, so that they can plan more effectively. And ultimately for the dealers, so that they can give the best possible date to their customers. And again, it's earlier in the day we talked about the value chain, and it's about where is this information adding value. And it is an important point. And I think it's using the information and actually going back to the basics and finding out how and when that information should be disseminated. So I think that is one of the key points of, you know, where the future needs to lie, is getting to understand the data and, you know, making sure it's disseminated to the right people at the right time. So how do we do that? Well, we tried not so much in terms of all the way down the supply chain, but certainly with our project, when we recently moved to a new service provider, Paragon, and this was a great opportunity for us to actually redesign the way that we did stuff. And historically, we were using barcoded information to actually interface into our system. Paragon came to us with a new bit of technology. It's been around, obviously, for a long, long time in the form of passive RFID. tags attached to each one of the vehicles. And this was a bit of a gamble in terms of saying, okay, will it work? What are the constraints? How successful will this be? But it was a calculated risk, and you know, the guys gave us the confidence that it can work, and pleased to say it has worked. And this year we've had a record year, and with certainly the RFID technology, we can track a car down to circa 50 centimetres, so using towers and masts and stuff like that. But that information is very important because it's real time, and as soon as it passes one of these gates, we get the interface into our SAP system, and that in turn goes over to our network, giving them an updated, accurate, estimated delivery date. And that follows that chain all the way through the process. So I think there is a great opportunity to actually expand that technology further up the chain, so that actually if it can be installed, or these tags or something like it installed at the factories, so the cars come pre-built, and then that same information is used at various phase gates all the way through the supply chain. But one of the things that does need is cooperation and collaboration from everyone in the supply chain. And having been to a number of these conferences, going way back when, is something that is always talked about. But there has to be a point in time that we all have to sit down around the table and have trust in each other, that actually passing confidential information isn't going to go into the wrong hands, because you're going to use that part of your own businesses. And there has to be the trust from the OEMs as well to actually give you that information, so that you can use that data, whether it's forecast information or real-time information, that you can use to make logistics far more efficient. But again, really don't know how we start engaging with yourselves, or you start engaging with the factories to actually make that happen. And there will be investments required, I would imagine. But I think that has to be the ultimate goal, certainly the first step of the goal. So, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Wes. Maybe David, we can sort of pass the mic back over to you now to answer similarly.
Okay, thanks, Christopher. Good afternoon, everybody. Well, for us, for PSA Group in the UK, I'm pleased to say we took 9% of the market last year, and that's about 270,000 vehicles. And for me, whilst that means we focus very heavily on the quality of the service that we provide our customers, and logistics has a role to play within that, very much we spend an awful lot of money on moving vehicles from the factory to dealers and to customers. It's an area of real opportunity and focus for us. Some of the bottlenecks, I mean, they're quite clearly identifiable, and some you can influence and some you can't. Market doesn't help us. There aren't many markets where you take the last 4 months of the year, and September as 1 month will be probably almost as big, maybe 90% of the size of the fourth quarter. That creates huge challenges for everyone from the factories right the way through the chain to see how we can become more efficient. In the same way that the principles of stock, the way that it gets built up and moved through the chain from country to country, or even region to region. But fundamentally, sitting around the quality of data that gets transferred and how it gets interpreted information sits at the heart for me, is what we need to embrace collectively to really improve our profitability, take some of the pressure off margins. That's margins for manufacturers, margins for logistics service providers, and margins for all parties. But there really is a huge amount of inefficiency in the chain, and we can collectively unlock a lot of these efficiency opportunities, because with a real stronger drive and awareness that a more integrated approach with more collaboration, and perhaps in some areas some consolidation of some of the players, we can line ourselves up more to do what seems ostensibly a simple thing, to move a vehicle that's been built from point A to point B. And I think part of the problem, the frustration that we've got, is that if you look and compare inbound logistics into a factory and perhaps outbound logistics from the factory, they can at times be chalk and cheese, but there's still a huge amount of cost and opportunity by treating outbound logistics with the same sort of respect and opportunity that inbound logistics gets today. So we're in a situation where we've got a long-term relationship with Jeffco, and we've been spending a lot of time. I'd encourage everybody to do this, whether you are a manufacturer or a service provider or a software provider, to get involved in relationships where people have a common objective. They look at the medium term rather than just the short term, and find ways in which, by streamlining the way that information's shared and interpreted, given the challenges that many manufacturers have, we, like the guys at JLR, have got some legacy systems. We're not going to change those overnight. We will change them, but not overnight. It's a big process. So we need help from parties who can take data streams that we interface with other players and actually put some sort of perspective over all of that data to actually run simulations as to how we could improve delivery zones, how we could optimize stock levels. Are we holding stock in the right place? So there's a huge amount of opportunity. And yes, Brexit may well bring some challenges, whether they are snuffed out or not, but we really have to take the lead now, because if margins are to come under further pressure in the next 2 to 3 years, then we can only blame ourselves if we don't work now to really get to grips with some of the fundamental inefficiencies that sit in the supply chain.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks to all of our speakers for the presentations and the sort of opening discussions. I think that lays a good groundwork for strengthening the outbound supply chain. And as you heard, and I think Louis mentioned this last session, the discussion is almost always here seems to be about the flow of information, or at least as much about the flow of information as it is a material or vehicles. So clearly, how we work on data, how we share data and information continues to really be part of the dominant way that we think we can address these issues. I would like to open this up now for Q&A. We'll, as usual format, we'll have some microphones going around, so you'll state your name and company, and we can go from there. If you're shy, you can use the app, and you can ask a question there, but I usually give preference to people being sociable as opposed to social media, but we'll go either way. You're all probably still a little food comatose from lunch, so I'm happy to start us off. Actually, there was something that came in from the app. It wasn't necessarily a question, but it was a comment that it was about Neil's presentation, that it was good to see CO2 as part of an analysis for some of this network optimization. But I actually wanted to kind of ask you and then the other panelists, to what extent is that sort of consideration actually factoring into some of your network optimizations and choices beyond maybe the convenience of it costing less in some cases, but is it a bigger factor, or is it becoming whether it's in tenders or in studies as you've done?
I think in the studies we have done, it's always very interesting to see the potential for reducing emission. If it is the deciding factor at the end versus cost, I don't think we are there yet. Cost and lead time is probably the most important factors when you do a network optimization study or review a network. But I think certainly if everything is equal and there is an opportunity to reduce the CO2 emission, then yes, that is absolutely taken into account. So I think when we do our studies, it's always a factor. How much it's impacting the end result and the changes, I'm not sure. I think cost and lead time is still a significant factor in that final decision. But I think another thing which Avis mentioned here, I think was interesting, and that was regarding sharing of information and the trust. You mentioned sort of trust and collaboration. Because I think when we ask for production forecast and trying to get some information about what's on the manufacturing line from the OEMs and try to get more details about what's actually on the line and what's coming on the line next week, that information is not so easily shared. I think it's a bit of reluctance to share that information with the suppliers, because that is considered as confidential information. And I think for the forecasting and planning purpose, if we could see more of that, what is actually physically produced next week, then at least that would give us a better indication about, or than just say a forecast figure.
What I find interesting about that is that, the factory or the company is giving you billions and billions of pounds or euros worth of product to move, but yet they can't trust you, where they've probably got a confidentiality agreement with you anyway. Information which is going to help them to get their cars there quicker and more efficiently as well. So, but that's not to say that we're perfect and we do that, but certainly whatever's in our control, we will certainly share our business plan figures with our suppliers so that they can plan more effectively. And that does pay dividends for us in terms of getting our product to our customers, ultimately the dealers, on a far quicker basis.
It is difficult because the more information that you share, clearly the more risk there is that it will change and vary. And for us at the extreme, we will work with Jeff, go on a 3-year horizon in terms of data, not production data, but sales and stock data with an indication of what production volumes could be like to really aid the macro planning, the bigger decisions. Because what we find is that you can only go so far to make some good short-term decision making, but some of the medium-term opportunities never get looked at if your horizon is only limited to 1, 3, 6 months. So it's getting that balance, and I think fundamentally comes back to a culture of the sort of supplier relationships that you want to develop and encourage, rather than try to go for the quick win, which is never the biggest win in terms of margin transfer from one player to another.
Can I just touch on the CO2 bit again? The UK government, I think it was in 2009, pledged that we would halve our CO2 output by 2023. In an industry that produces cars, that's interesting, but one that moves them by lorry is really interesting. I did a speech on this some time ago, and I still to this day don't believe that our industry won't be heavily either taxed or affected by that incentive in the next few years, because if you look at our air quality, I think just about every major city in the UK, the air quality testing fails. So there will be more low emission zones, I don't doubt for 1 minute, and there will be an awful lot more of keeping trucks out of cities. It's almost inevitable. So I think we've got some other challenges to come as well.
It's certainly a good point, and it's also probably worth pointing out that that's also not just CO2. Clearly, this is all other kinds of noxious gas and other emissions which are polluting. And we've obviously seen in the shipping side, Niels, maybe you can talk to that a little bit. Obviously, with Seeker zones that came in Northern Europe and the coasts of the US and Canada. Obviously, it sort of coincided with a perhaps serendipitous drop in bunker fuel costs, but nevertheless, that's a higher price factored in. How do you see that developing as those emission standards get tightened around the world, perhaps the Mediterranean over the next couple of years and further afield? On the shipping side.
Yeah, well, it's not really my specialty area, but obviously we see that regulations are coming more into force about the SRC regulation, which means that you are not allowed to use the bunker fuel within 12 miles around Europe, that you need to use the diesel fuel. So there are certainly coming more and more regulations by IMO. But I think, as we all know, through IMO, it takes a long time to apply regulations. So even if the state governments would like to introduce it, it has to go through IMO, and it very often takes a long time for these regulations to apply. And maybe my colleague from UECC have something to add in terms of the... Björn, you are down there? Can you maybe add something on the regulations when you come to sulfur and
right in the middle. Yeah.
Thank you. No, I'll do that. We have a new regulation coming up, actually, potentially in 2020, where there's a new requirement that globally vessels will not be allowed to burn fuel that has more than 0.5% sulfur. There will be a review in 2018 to determine whether or not there's sufficient supply of this 0.5% sulfur bunker. And in some areas, it could actually be postponed until 2025. But I think in Europe, the signals are that this will be implemented in Europe from 2020, meaning all vessels moving in European waters will have to burn only 0.5% sulfur.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other comments, questions from the audience? Another one from my side to the car makers. I wanted to get a little bit of a sense of how dynamic your networks are. So, for example, you know, how many ports of import are you using? How many distribution centers in the UK? And how often are these changing? Or is it a flexible network? Do you shift supply? Do you try and keep a consistent kind of footprint as much as possible? Perhaps we can start with you, David.
5 questions in one then, I think. I'll answer the easy ones, I think. In terms of our network's reasonably stable, but of course customer demands aren't. And what we've been working on very closely over the last 5 years is how we can streamline the logistics chain, mindful of the fact that there's always a proportion of stock that we bring into the UK that is unsold and spare production. And it's making sure that how do we locate that in the right part of the UK at one of our 3 regional distribution centres to make sure that the lead time when that vehicle is ordered by a customer and the cost of moving that vehicle to the customer is optimised. It's a moving feast, which is why having tools that allow you to simulate in the future and re-simulate what's happened in the past can really help. But very much our view is that the less time you spend touching a vehicle, the better. And what we're looking and driving much more heavily towards than in previous times is some really port-centric solutions so that when we bring the vehicles into the UK, they're resting at a point where everything that needs to happen to that vehicle, whether it's PDI, whether it's actually some additional services for light commercial vehicles, ply lining or conversions for motorhomes, how can that happen in the same point rather than have to be moved again around the country? So we have 3 RDCs and at this point in time I don't see any changes to that.
Elias?
Yeah. So certainly with Kia, we have got one preparation centre up in Stirlingbury near Grimsby, which is operated by Paragon, and one transportation provider, so which is GBA Transport. So we'd like to keep things nice and simple, and that can be taken all the way back to our sort of humble beginnings. Although, you know, there will come a point where eventually we may potentially need another port of entry and another transport provider, but that is at least 5 to 10 years away in my estimations. We've got 185 dealers around the country, and one of the things that we have tried to do, and again, unlike the other OEMs in the room, we have been fairly lucky because we started with nothing. So we had the ability to actually design a system which worked for us and worked for our dealers. And part and parcel of that is the ability to provide accurate dates to those dealers of when their cars are going to be delivered. And that's basically used from information from our suppliers, our factories, and basically using a simple algorithm, say, well, we know how long it takes to get to production out, to being loaded, to coming on a ship, and then ultimately we know very clearly how long it takes through our port operation. So with all that information and the final date which is spitted out to the dealer, that accuracy is something like 96%. So 96% of the time, the date that we state on the order, even if a car is in production, will be about 96% of the time accurate. There's a lot of intelligence behind that, but ultimately it's not a solution which requires a lot of technology. It's basic. We would like it to get to 100% accurate, and it doesn't factor in all the issues which can happen down the supply chain. Yeah.
Does that 96% cover from Slovakia or also production out of Korea?
Slovakia and Korea.
Yeah.
You know, getting a car from Slovakia is far more complicated because of the handover points than getting a car from Korea, because we know that it'll take 35 days from Korea over to Immingham. But with Slovakia, with the different modes of transport that it can go through, you know, delays at the port of exit or at the port of entry can mean that it can be a few weeks out. And also you're mixing manifests as well. You know, the factory will pump out hundreds of cars, and they could be spanning across several different manifests. And all of a sudden, you end up in a situation where you've got 10 cars from one manifest and 50 cars from another, all mixed up in one pot. So it is a bit more complicated. The short sea legs are usually more complicated. And that's no one's fault. That ultimately it does come down to the way the vehicles are loaded and dispatched. Ultimately, we need all the cars over as quick as possible. So.
Yeah, we see pretty similar stats and metrics to Kia in terms of about a 96-97% delivery on time rate, although the vast majority of those vehicles are fulfilled from existing production stock rather than fresh production. I think the other challenges that we see, which we will collectively find it difficult to influence, of course, is when you're bringing in product from Southern Europe, particularly the water and the Bay of Biscay at certain times of year can be pretty tricky, and that can create some unwelcome challenges. But the irony being, I think, at times in our experience, because it creates challenges that are actually much more visible and easier to manage and adjust ETAs to dealers and to customers.
Okay, thank you. We have a question off the app here, which is that, as you all know, in the UK we have two registration periods, two months, March and September. Should there be four, would that help vehicle flow and reduce stockpiling?
No.
So, question for anyone there.
No, not for me.
No.
No.
I think two is enough.
I think the reality is that our experience, and my view would be that when we moved from one registration month in August to two, I don't know how many years ago, it just created two sets of problems rather than one. If we accept that the UK market, like Southern Ireland, has two registration plate changes a year, then I think the thing for me is about how can the market, how can the supply chain adapt more effectively to support it. Howard was talking earlier about transport and driver capacity issues, and they get really quite strained at those times of the year, particularly this stage where cabotage relaxation has ended, yet I'm sure you've got a few vehicles to deliver, and so have we as we move into October. So for me, I think it's more about not changing the number of registration plates, but in terms of how many in a year, but actually what support is around the industry, so that we're not all going from famine to feast at times and high cost to low cost and being inefficient in how we can get capacity in place to move vehicles to customers.
It is, of course, the perennial issue in this industry, month-end, quarter-end, year-end registration periods. There seems to be a lot of inefficiency that gets built into that. For anyone on the panel, can you share some strategies that you employ for, let's say, the registration peaks? I mean, do you rely on cabotage or other processes to sort of manage your supply chain during these peaks and troughs?
Yep. Certainly from our perspective, it does come back down to the first topic we were talking about, which is information and data, making sure that our suppliers have got the best possible information, whether they be the shipping line, whether it preparation agents or transportation companies, well in advance. So it does, the whole process starts at the end of this year. For next year, we'll be sharing our business plans or certainly our wholesale plan with our suppliers early on, so that they can start planning. And obviously within the course of any year, there will be iterations to that, and if we can, we will share those. The problem comes when someone in Korea decides to actually increase your target by about 10%. That obviously does cause a few issues But fundamentally, sharing that information does allow everyone to actually plan far more effectively. And then it does come back down to a simple form of making sure there's good lines of communication, making sure that everyone's aware what's happening and when, and ultimately getting the right stock to the right dealers at the right time, in the right quality. So, you know, there's many, many players in that whole chain. And it's not simply one agent or two agents or one partner or two partners. It's a number of people, and all have to work in sync to actually get to a target.
We work upstream with suppliers, again, as you guys do, to share the information that we've got to the best of its ability so that we can plan better. But we also spend a lot of time, particularly the last 2 years, working with our dealer networks to share with them a little bit what goes on behind the curtain in terms of the challenges of what seemingly moving one vehicle to a postcode in Birmingham, even though it's been built in Colan sort of 3 or 4 weeks previously. And it's, in my experience, it's quite refreshing when you explain to some of the dealers the challenges that go behind the delivery when they just call a vehicle off. And as they start to understand the huge wheels that have to mesh at the same time to deliver a great service, they certainly start to change their behaviour, recognise that their actions can have a really damaging impact on their own service performance. So we'll do things like simple video broadcasts with the networks. We really make sure that our sales teams are chipped up in terms of understanding the importance of calling vehicles off early, and we're prepared to adjust lead times, standard lead times to dealers, and at times we even try to, I wouldn't say frighten them, that's probably too dramatic a word, but to make it clear that you know, if you take the postal industry, you know, we all know that a first-class stamp costs the same amount of money in January and in November, but we all post our letters and cards early at Christmas time, and taking that sort of philosophy in terms of peaks into the automotive industry, we found with our networks it's been well received, and they understand the need to act early when they've got the choice. It's not perfect, but it helps to reduce the size of the pain when you do get problems.
Okay.
And from our perspective, of course, we are not directly involved in the registration periods in UK, but we see a similar picture on a global scale, that you have seasonal variations. Now, at the end of the year, you see now volumes are really building up, say, going to US to meet the end of the year sales and the sales forecast. So it's on exactly the same situation, but on a broader scale. So I think, again, yes, it's back to the forecasting, getting the right information on time and plan for these seasonal variations and in an early time. I mean, we haven't built the capacity for the vessels for seasonal adjustments, but at the same time we have a large fleet of vessels with a variety of capacity on each individual vessel, so we can reallocate vessels for the seasonal demands in given markets. But it's, even if we know that these things are coming every year, we still need good forecasts from the customers related to these seasonal variations.
Okay, thank you. We have another question in on the live feed. This one actually from a close colleague of ours, Abel Sampson, who's the publisher of Car Design News, our sister publication. And he's asking, does the increase or expected increase in electric vehicles give an opportunity to move vehicles around in a more eco-friendly way? Or perhaps we can also say, does it change the way you need to move vehicles? Perhaps in experience you have or are anticipating. We saw the statistics this morning about electrification over the next 10 years. So does anybody have any insight that they can share?
From a shipping perspective, that is going to have some impact. Certainly, if you ship 2,000, 3,000 electrical vehicles, you need to have a different system in order to close any fires which potentially could take place. You are not using water anymore. And the same with the hydrogen, any other potential alternative fuels. So we have a project now going with some manufacturers where we are evaluating what means do we take on board a vessel in order to maintain the security and safety for potentially the alternative fuel vehicles coming on board. So yes, it's going to have a certain impact on shipping as well as the terminal activities, I guess.
us, well, actually, if you'd like to have a look outside, we've got a nice new truck full of electric vehicles. So we're doing it. It's not a problem. The only problem we are seeing is weight. So
right.
they're heavy. But apart from that, it doesn't make a difference to us on trucks.
Okay.
That's all.
I think, Joe, just looking at some of the data in terms of electric vehicle and alternative fuel vehicles is quite staggering. Yeah, it's just something which I've written here in terms of 2013, the number of EVs which were registered in the UK was 3,500. And year to date up to July 2016, that number is now 75,000. So I think it does highlight an interesting trend in terms of where the market's going now. Well, it will never, I don't think, get to 100% of all cars sold, but it will certainly become a major part of the car sales in the UK. In terms of us and us as a manufacturer, will it save costs? I don't think so. Yeah, you know, given the restrictions in terms of selling a car as a new car, you know, there's only so much mileage we can have on a vehicle to classify as a new vehicle. So we have to transport these via transporters or via trains to get them to the final destination. But it does, you know, from everything from the shipping lines, you know, there are safety issues there and safety considerations from a transportation and also from a preparation perspective. There are a number of elements that we have to take into consideration for health and safety.
I think two things for me. One, pretty much it depends upon the speed of growth of the electric network. At the moment, we've got hybrids in the marketplace as well as pure electric vehicles. Many manufacturers actually currently have a core electrical dealer network for sales and repair and maintenance of vehicles, and those sorts of requirements will change. And at the moment, if you said we're going to triple our electric volumes and we're going to go through the same routes, then that would obviously have an impact on logistics and supply routings. And I guess somewhere between the two, there's also then the maintenance and storage aspects, which, as we all know, are pertinently quite different for electric vehicles as opposed to fuel combustion. So there's some moderate things there, but I think fundamentally it's about the market creating the appetite, how government and policy can encourage this type of vehicle to really take off.
One of the things that sort of strikes me is that these vehicles aren't just electric, but they're increasingly connected. So, I mean, we're observing more manufacturers using remote tools, telematics, to track the battery charge across the supply chain, and maybe to keep an eye on that sort of level. And I guess for an electric vehicle, that may be particularly important. We're sort of on that idea of the connected car and the connected supply chain. We heard a little bit in the last session from Associated British Ports about that vision of a smart port, right, and of using the technology, including inside the vehicle. Is that something any of you or companies or clients are starting to use or observe or study? Can you share any insight on that? And another plug for us in your magazine, Finished Vehicle Logistics, you'll see another feature on Jaguar Land Rover talking about what they're doing, so have a read.
Sorry.
Yeah.
From a telematics point of view, I guess there's two things that jump out for me. There's firstly the fact, like some other manufacturers, we're putting telematics into cars, and as a result it's making certain elements of our range much more attractive and open to younger drivers, which is great news for us and great news for them. And the other thing upstream with production is telematics increasingly, as it becomes a huge part of our overall build, opens up new logistics opportunities in terms of supply chain. Some of the tools we talked about that are current today maybe could be usurped by telematics. But that again comes back to a more medium-term collaborative approach, I think, between all players in the chain to see the benefits of that and to be working together to make use of that data.
I've been in discussions previously about autonomous vehicles and how that can change the logistics sort of setup. And I think it's one of those things that when they're all autonomous, it would work. Yeah. Having some autonomous and some not you know, this wonderful idea of cars taking themselves out of a parking space and putting them on a truck or a train or a boat, a ship, sorry, is wonderful, but I can't see that working while there are some that don't. You know, I think if they're all autonomous, then fine, but who knows.
We have a project with an OEM doing or testing out on some of the autonomous driving as well, and one day the ship might be loaded with autonomous vehicle without any stevedores anymore. I think one day it's just a matter of time. And they are all coming, as you're saying. In terms of the telematics, I think on the terminals, that could have some huge benefits. You will exactly know where all the cars are, the right car at any point in time. You will eliminate scanning. You can eliminate some other parts of the work. So there, I think there are opportunities for improvement, and we can use that data through the telematics. On board the vessel, it's probably not so necessary to know exactly where every vehicle is, as long as you know where the boat is or the vessel is.
Okay, thank you. We have at least one more question here on the app, and it is, what impact do you expect mass customization will have on traditional logistics and manufacturing? So mass customization of vehicles, I guess, do you see that increasing? What's the impact it might have on finished vehicle logistics?
I think some manufacturers already do it to quite a large degree, and that model's being replicated, I think, in other areas. I think a lot of it's to do with volume, for one thing. So, you know, the more you customise, the more time it takes, the more land you need, the more workshop space you need. But it's already, you know, some manufacturers in the UK are doing that to quite a high degree already, I think.
I think it's your definition of customisation, isn't it? You know, we've had options on cars for so many years, and some manufacturers, as you say, basic specification of the vehicle is without so many options that customers automatically choose. I don't feel it's going to have a dramatic impact, because the decisions are taken upstream so early in some areas about production planning, and whilst maybe for some of the premium players the lead times can be longer, I think for the volume generalists, I think there's a degree of consideration as to what the most likely customisation options are, could be, will be, and how that's presented to the market. So I think it balances to a degree.
I would agree. You know, certainly with it's something which has been around in the industry, and it is the degree of customization that you're undertaking. You know, if it's simplistic customization, which is changing the interior, or you know, putting in a new audio system, that can and does take place in PDI centres up and down the country. So I think, whilst it adds a bit of time to the ultimate lead time, I don't think it will fundamentally affect the overall lead time.
Okay, I think we have a question here.
Paul Donaldson from Transrac International. Just coming back to Howard's point on the fact is his shiny cars outside on the transporter, the very nice Teslas indeed. We're talking about how cars are moving logistics-wise. They actually came in from Palo Alto in San Francisco in containers. All Teslas are moved in containers out from the factory, electric vehicles into the final distribution point, and then the final miles done by trucks. Obviously, containers are a very important part of the logistics chain out there. You know, obviously, from my point of view, you know, we're plugging that point, and I don't want to plug this point too far, but they are containerized electric vehicles in huge volumes.
Okay, well, that's a fair point to make. I think we'll probably start moving to the voting unless there's a last question. We can probably take one more question from the audience if there is one. But if not, then maybe we'll take that opportunity to transition to our live voting session. But before I do, I would like to thank the panel for their presentations and discussion. This gave us some good insights to how we can work together and share data a bit more. So once again, a reminder on how we can log on to the live app. You would have, as I mentioned this morning, got an email at around 8 o'clock this morning, which would give you a link, which would actually connect you directly to that. But otherwise, you can also follow the link we have up on the screen here, bit.ly/ALUK16live. Use your username is your email address and delegate number as your password. Delegate number should be on your badge, so you can fill it in that way. Or you can use a smartphone, you can use a tablet, you can use a laptop. Unfortunately, you can't just shout out the answers. Well, you can actually. Go ahead. I'll try, but you'll see that you'll have a live polling here on that. So it's always interesting. It gives us the chance to sort of take the pulse of the room over some issues and trends. About half the questions come from some of our sponsors, and the other half are questions that just a few questions that we put together to kind of get your opinion on. Kind of a quick note, because people outside of the room can also be participating in this voting, that is to say our live audience. For those of you watching outside the room, keep in mind that there's a slight delay between the video and the questions, so don't listen to me reading them out as if you're listening to me at all. I don't know why you would. But don't listen to me, just follow the answer. The answer will pop up. You'll see that if you're on a smartphone, there's a few tabs at the bottom. One of them is vote, so you'll just click onto the vote tab and you'll get the question. If you're on a tablet or a laptop, it will just appear below the live feed, so you'll be able to answer the question there. That delay, of course, is to keep Louis and I in check in case we use any foul language, and they can edit it out before it goes out to the younger people watching. In this industry, young, I think, is 66 or something like that. But hopefully you've all managed to log on. And I think we will be ready for our first question in a moment. Yes, here we are. So this question comes from our global sponsor, WWL. And the question is, as an OEM, do you feel that there are opportunities to optimize your outbound supply chain and planning process? Is that answer yes, we have just such a plan in progress. Yes, but we need external help to do so. Yes, but this is not a priority right now. No, there's no room for improvement in our outbound supply chain, or you just don't know. We're not focused on outbound supply chain optimization right now. So it's simple. You have the options in front of you. Just select what you think and click send, and we will get our answers. So 44% of you say you don't know. You're just not focused on that. 28%, well, so in theory, 56% of you, a majority, actually do, are interested in this, have a plan to do it, or want help to do it. And actually, it's good to see that nobody just doesn't have a priority for this. So it is obviously important, but most or a good share of you don't really know how to go about doing it or aren't really focused on it.
Okay, so just let me know and I can help you.
Yeah, okay. Okay, another question from another global sponsor, CHEP. How often do you run out of reusable packaging and need to buy cardboard to avoid process disruption? This is in your plants, it's obviously not at home. Is it once a week or more? Is it once a month? Is it once a year? Does that never happen? Or in fact, you don't use reusable packaging? So I hope that's because the room is maybe a little more finished vehicle logistics focused at the moment, and maybe you're not wrapping up your cars with all that much reusable stuff, because otherwise that's pretty worrying. Or maybe it's an opportunity for CHEP. I guess you can look at it that way as well. 55% don't use it, 21% never run out. Next question is from our other global sponsor, Changju Logistics CDC. And it's, what do you look for most when looking to partner with a Chinese logistics provider? If you're not, maybe you can say, what would you look for most? Would it be transparent operations, established networks, IC capability, owned assets, a cost advantage? So if you are looking to do business in China or have, what's most important for you to partner with the Chinese provider? Established networks, 48%. So obviously, those of you involved are looking to get involved either in or out of China, however that might work, really want a provider that has really established themselves, has assets, equipment, things in place. Transparency also quite high up on the list at all. Owned assets doesn't seem to be that important. Okay, our next question, our favorite topic. What impact will Brexit have on the automotive supply chain, including for your company? It will be negative and costly. The impact will be neutral or mild. It will have a positive impact, or you simply don't know. Obviously, in some ways you don't know, but hopefully some of you will take a risk and choose and answer what you think. I guess that's kind of how it should be, really, in terms of really splitting the room. I would draw your attention to that minor little 3% there. You know, this room may have still be listening to experts a little bit more than the rest of the British public, but I won't draw too many conclusions from that. But obviously, we'll be tracking this pretty consistently over the months and years ahead, so we'll come back to you on that very regularly. Split across the board. Okay, we've also been hearing a lot about technology, Internet of Things, cloud-based supply chain communication and/or advanced automation, so Industry 4.0 in this space, let's say. Is this something already being used in your company's supply chain or business? Is it something you're investigating now for future, but maybe you don't really use it right now? Or is it just not something you're using and really it's not a big factor for you either right now? Okay, so perhaps as we might expect, most of you, or I mean, in the huge majority are either using it or want to use it, but most are investigating for future, but maybe it's not such a big factor right now. Only 14% not use or thinking about using it. I think we have, this is, I think, our last question, if I'm not mistaken. So this is to get a sense of what's happening in your business over the next year. Over the next year, my company will invest in new assets, equipment, or increase my logistics budget, maintain stable assets, equipment, or budget, or trim level of assets or equipment or budget. So that's pretty positive. Almost 70% are either investing or increasing their logistics spend. So there's a pretty bullish view in the room here, and 30% maintaining it, only 2% actually looking to cut. So you don't think Brexit's going to be so positive, but you're not actually reflecting. So you kind of inversed it here. It's still going to grow. So I don't know where don't quite know where we make those two things, but good to see. Good to see a positive view looking ahead. We should see even more of you here at this conference next year then. Pretty sure that was all the questions, unless there was another added. No, I think that was all. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. It's always fun, like I said, just to take the pulse, get a sense of what some of you are thinking, anonymously as well. So it tends to help the truth a bit more. Once again, a big thank you to our panel for this discussion, and stick around. We'll take a coffee break now, but we're back here at 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock for our final session. We're bringing Alan Draper back. We have Levent Yüksel from Jaguar Land Rover, Luke Nadal, the CEO of Jeffco. So we're bringing together a high-level Q&A panel. So please that, and then join us for the gala dinner after. So enjoy your coffee hosted by Evolution.